Hello everyone, welcome to my book review of Operation Red Dragon, Book 2 in the World War III series. Let's see how this book fared in my honest opinion.
Hey everyone, hope everyone's doing good. Hope you all are doing happy, doing blessed, doing safe, and doing well. This will be my book review of the paperback book Operation Red Dragon and the Unthinkable, Book 2 of the World War III series. And just to kind of give you some basic information about this book. So, this book is the second of the World War III series. It has two authors. One is James Rosone and the other is Miranda Watson. It is 404 pages long. That includes 42 chapters plus a words from the editor and the abbreviation key. And it does come in paperback. And you can kind of classify this as military fiction. Okay, that's the kind of genre it is in right now. Now, before I can really dive into this book, I need to kind of give you an overall view of how we got to book 2. Okay? And I did do a review of book 1 on my channel, so please go check it out. Okay? But from this moment on, I am going to be adding a spoiler warning. Okay? Because I do not want you spoiled for anything that happens in book 1 or for anything I might say and talk about that happens in book 2. So, from this moment on, there will be spoilers. Once you see this symbol leave the screen, that means you're spoiler free and you're free to rock and roll, okay? But from this moment on, there will be spoilers. So, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You have been warned. Spoilers from this moment forward. So, let's kind of kick things off with a look back at book 1. Okay. So, book 1 was titled Prelude to World War III and the Rise of the Islamic Republic and the Rebirth of America. So, in book 1, you kind of had this Bin Laden type dude, okay? You basically had this guy who was operating in the shadows. And he basically foments war between Pakistan and India. Okay? And the war turns nuclear. And in the aftermath of all this, you have the birth of the Islamic Republic, which is made up of what's left over from India and Pakistan, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. You have Indonesia. You know, it becomes an Islamic superpower, okay? As all this is going on, the United States economy is dropping. People can't get their jobs back. And in the midst of all this, a businessman, a business tycoon decides to run for president. Where have we heard that before? And basically starts making some major changes to the American economy. He starts doing things that start bringing America back. Okay. And then as all this is going on, you got Russia and China, kind of gearing up for something. Okay. Russia and China trying to gear up for something. Okay. And basically becoming an ally of the Islamic Republic. They become an ally of the Islamic Republic. Alright. During book 1, the Islamic Republic has decided that Israel needs to go bye-bye. And so they launch a war. And in response, we send troops over to Israel to defend it. And it turns bloody. It turns controversial. And really, neither side has their hands clean. Okay? It's just that simple. Really, neither side has their hands clean. As this is all going on, Russia decides to invade Europe. So we have to send more forces over to Europe to defend it. Okay? And throughout the entire book, you hear hints that something big is coming. Okay, that something huge is coming. Okay, but you don't really know exactly what it is until the very end of the book, and the book ends with this huge event. Okay, that's where the book ends. Okay, and then we move on to book 2 of the series, which is Operation Red Dragon and the Unthinkable. And book 2 picks up right where book 1 left off. There is no like time jump or anything. And I'm going to get to more of this here in a minute, but it basically kicks off where book 1 left off. Okay? That's where it kicks off at. All right? So now we get to book 2. And I'm going to start with what I liked about book 2. First off, it doesn't immediately jump into the action. Okay? When you start book 2, you're not looking through the perspective of a military man. You're looking through the perspectives of civilians as these 2 huge events happen to the United States. These events that are going to have massive, massive repercussions. Okay? And I do mean massive repercussions. That's how big. Think of the unthinkable, okay, when it comes to an attack on the homeland. Think of the unthinkable, okay? And that's what you get with this, okay? That's what this event is. There's 2 huge events that happen on American soil at the exact same time. And when you first start off this book, you're starting off from the point of view of a nurse, a guy in Manhattan, a guy driving his truck. You know, some normal civilians who are just trying to live their lives in this world. Okay? Now, after that, you get like a break where they're trying to, come to terms with the ramifications and everything, and then you get to the action. So it don't take long to get to the action, okay? And when you do get to the action, it's quick, it's fast, it's frantic. I mean, I want to say if Michael Bay had made this into a movie, it would be this book. But there's another book series I'm thinking more, it'd be more along the lines of Michael Bay. So I'm thinking more Christopher Nolan. If you know Christopher Nolan, he would have made these 2 books into a movie. Okay? Another thing I liked about it was that there was no time jump after the book. Okay? You left off with these 2 huge events. Okay? You saw it from the civilian perspective. Not the military, the civilian. Okay? Who were there at the time. And basically, you experience what they go through in that moment in real time. And you experience both some of them living and some of them dying. Okay? And I think that's another thing that's really good, is that you don't just see these, events at the beginning of this book from the military perspective or from the perspective of the president or, the head of the republic or anything else. You see it from people who are just living their day-to-day lives. You see it from the perspective of a mother who's going to the grocery store to get her kids some food. You see it from the perspective of a nurse who just got off a double shift. You see it from the perspective of a guy in, a high-rise, okay? You don't see it at first from the perspectives of the established characters. You see it from the perspectives of people who are just living in this world. And it does give this moment a grounded reality, okay? Futuristic weapons are in this book, but they are extremely familiar. Understand something. This book was written 2015, 2016-ish, okay? Before everything in the world was going on, okay? This book is basically predicting where I think drone warfare will go, okay? Because in this book, you have drone tanks being the first waves of an attack. In this book, you have drones delivering weapons of mass destruction to targets, okay? In this book, you have cyber warfare. In this book, you have all this futuristic weaponry that may have seemed futuristic in, say, 2015, 2016, but if you look today at today's news articles, you will see it happening, okay? You will see it coming to fruition. Another thing I really liked about this was the abbreviation key. You know, throughout this book, there are many abbreviations, and if you are not in the military or if you've never read these type of books, you may not know what these abbreviations are, okay? You really may not know what these abbreviations mean in any way, shape, or form, okay? But the fact that they did add an abbreviation key, does make it easier for just everyday people to understand what's going on in this book, to understand what that is and what this is. I would have liked it better if it had a glossary of terms, okay? But the abbreviation key is very much appreciated, and it is one of my pet peeves about these type of books, that they don't include any type of reference for someone who is maybe just picking up this book to understand what, you know, an MRAP is, or what an M1A tank is, or what this is, or what that is. Especially the futuristic stuff, okay? So yeah, it is very much appreciated for, you know, them to include an abbreviation key. Another thing is I like the length of the chapters, okay? I think the chapters found a good middle spot, and in between chapters there are places where you can kind of stop as it changes perspective to where you can kind of stop and put your bookmark in. So if you're reading this in an airport, on a plane, or in your bed at night, it's all good, okay? It's all good. And back to what I was saying earlier about the futuristic weaponry, I believe that this book was foretelling the future of combat with drones. Okay? This book was written in 2016. 2015, 2016-ish. Okay? And I believe that this book was foretelling the future of combat with drones. Because in this book, you don't just have like small suicide drones. You have drone tanks. You have drone support vehicles. You have drones, fighter jets. You have entire fighter wings of drone aircraft, okay, that are going toe-to-toe with other drone aircraft, okay? And I think not only does it foretell the future of drones in terms of, you know, how they're going to be used and implemented in the future, but also how they can be countered as well, okay? So, yeah, I think one of the big things this did tell was the future of drone warfare. Because this book was written, like, you know, in the 2015, 16-ish time frame, okay? So that was before what's been going on around the world happened. And I think that it really did foretell the evolution of drones from the Predator, which was high up in the chain of command, to in this book where you have drone tanks launching mass wave assaults onto a position as normal soldiers are trying to shoot them down, okay? And then behind them come the actual manned tanks, okay? So yeah, I think this was foretelling the future of combat with drones. And this is before whatever been going on in the world has happened, okay? Now let me talk about what I didn't like. Earlier I talked about how an abbreviation key was really appreciated, okay? But I felt that this book really did deserve a glossary and maybe some pictures. Now, when I say pictures, I don't mean they need to put pictures of, like, the tanks, especially the drone tanks. Okay, I understand that. But I'm talking about maybe some maps of where this is happening at. And a glossary of terms, so that way, you know, we have more than just an abbreviation of terms. We have an actual glossary that explains what this is, what that is, okay? I like the abbreviation key. I thought it was really appreciated to have one. But I think it would have been better if they had maybe some maps scattered throughout the book of what's all going down, as well as a glossary of terms that actually goes in depth in explaining what this is, what that is, instead of just an abbreviation key that basically tells you what this abbreviation means, what that abbreviation means, and so on and so forth. Another thing I didn't like is when they changed perspectives, okay, especially in the first part of the book when they're looking at the big events that happen in the United States, they don't really give you an intro to those perspectives. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they don't. It's just the paragraph ends, and then suddenly you're in another perspective. I would have felt a little bit better if every time they changed perspective, they would say, okay, businessman in uptown Manhattan, especially at the beginning of the book, so that way you wouldn't get confused. Because if this is the first time reading this book, and you're changing this perspective and that perspective and this perspective and that perspective, okay, it can get kind of confusing, and you can kind of try to figure out, like, where am I at again? You know, and this happens throughout the entire book, where there are times where a couple of characters are in the same area, but they don't tell you they're changing perspectives. And it can get a little hard sometimes to kind of figure out where you're at and what's all going on with whom, etc., etc. And this is just a pet peeve of mine, okay? And that is, in this book, you really don't know who the good guys are, because both sides, whether you're rooting for the Americans or you're rooting for NATO or you're rooting for the Islamic Republic, there really are no good guys, because both sides do human violations. And I didn't really like that, because I know that if an American general had gone and done a human rights violation in war, he'd be kicked out and stripped. He'd be gone, okay? I mean, he literally would be, stripped and probably arrested. But in this book, even though he is chastised by the current president and vice president for these human rights violations, he's not removed from command. He's not really punished at all. He's just basically given a slap on the wrist. Now, I understand that they did it first, but two wrongs don't make it right for me. And I really did not like that about this book, okay? Was the fact that no matter which side you were rooting for, that all sides have blood on their hands. And maybe that's just something inside me, but I didn't really like that perspective where everyone was doing everything wrong. Because in my book, two wrongs don't make it right. And I felt that had an American general gone and done a human rights violation and it be streamed around the world, that it would only make things worse. So, yeah, I just don't feel it in terms of the whole human rights violation issue, because it really does make it seem like there are no good guys in this whole situation. So, in conclusion, let me say this. This was really the meat of the series so far, okay? Book 1 set up the world. Book 2 is where you actually start getting into the main course, okay? Book 1 was the setup. Book 2 is where you really dig into things. And there were a couple of things I did like about it. Really, there were a couple of things I did like about it. First off, it had good action. And there was no time jump between what happened at the end of the first book with the big events that happen in the United States and what starts off this book, okay? And I like the fact that the event was told from everyone's perspective, not just the president or military or whatnot, but it was told from everyone's perspective, from people just living in the world to those who actually make decisions. I like the futuristic weaponry, and I like the fact that if we're told what combat with drones will be like. in a very realistic sense, okay? And I do believe that what's described in this book is where we're heading, okay? An abbreviation key is very much welcome. And the chapters have breaks in them, so that way if you're reading in an airport, or if you're reading on an airplane, a bus, or even if you're just reading in bed, you can take advantage of those breaks and put a bookmark in there and be on your way and not really lose your spot. Whereas some books don't really have that, and it kind of makes it hard for you to put your bookmark in there and get back into the flow of things. So it really does make keeping your flow reading this book easier to maintain. Okay. Then there's the cons. And there really ain't a whole lot of cons, okay? There ain't a whole lot I really disliked about this book. First off, I appreciated the abbreviation key, but I felt a more in-depth explanation of some of the stuff in the book was necessary, especially for people who are not in the military, who don't read this type of book, that could help them get along in this book. And I felt that it could have used pictures as well. And not really pictures of the technology, but maps of where this was happening, okay? Not in every chapter, but like just throughout the book, add maps to big events that happened in the book. Just add maps, especially at the beginning of the book, okay? It would have been nice to have a map of the big events and everything that associated with it, before like really getting into the perspectives of those who were there. Okay? Throughout the book, and this is really bad, especially at the beginning of the book, but throughout the book, when a perspective changes, there's really no intro to it. Now, every now and then you'll get an intro, but if two characters are basically in the same spot, there's really no intro or nothing that really lets you know, hey, the perspective has changed. So you really have to kind of dig through the weeds a little bit and try to find out when this perspective has changed, okay? Because it is very difficult to kind of determine when the perspective of the book has changed from one character to another, even if they're in the same location. Now, there are times where there is an intro, but really, throughout the book, you really have to kind of be on your toes a little bit when that perspective changes. Especially at the beginning of the book, when you're getting all these perspectives of these two big events. It doesn't really give you a whole lot of intros of, oh, this is a nurse going to a grocery store. And I think that they should have done that a lot more. Added a lot more added a lot more intros to the perspective changes in the book. And finally, this is just me, okay, maybe this is just me, but the fact that both sides, whether you're talking about NATO versus Russia, whether you're talking about the United States versus China, whether you're talking about the Islamic Republic versus Israel and the United States, no matter who you're talking about, no one has their hands clean, that both sides have human rights violations on their tab, that both sides commit huge human rights violations, okay? And from my perspective, it don't really matter who started it, but I just felt that if that had been happening with an American general, he would have been stripped of his command or arrested, okay? If that had happened to any other general, he would have been, taken off the battlefield, okay? Because human rights violations, especially the big ones in this book, would warrant some type of huge response instead of a stern talking to, okay? And I felt that really all the general got in this book, all the generals that did their human rights violations in this book, really did not get nothing but a stern talking to, okay? And I felt that they would have been pulled off the battlefield, at least on the American and NATO side. Now, Russia, China, the Islamic Republic, that might be a different story. But I do feel that, at least on the American side, if what this general did was done in real life, he would have been pulled off the battlefield. Okay? As an example, hey, there are rules that we have to follow, so that way we don't become like our enemy. Alright? So that was something I did not like about this book. But overall, I enjoyed this book. All right. Overall, I enjoyed this book. I thought this was a really good book. And it really is getting us into the main course of this book series. Okay? And I already got book 3 of the series, which is Operation Red Dawn and the Siege of Europe. And like book 1, book 2 ended on a huge event. And I can't wait to see what happens in book 3. Okay? But yeah, after taking everything into account, after taking everything, both the pros and cons into account, my final score for this book is a 7 out of 10. If they had just added maybe a few maps, a glossary, and maybe not had everyone doing all these human rights violations, it would have probably gotten a higher score. Because I did enjoy the book. This was a really good book. It's just those pet peeves of mine. No maps, no glossary, the human rights violations. It really brought the score down a little bit. So I give it an 8 out of 10. Okay, that's what I'm going to give it. And a solid 8 out of 10. Okay, I think this is a really good book. But yeah, 8 out of 10 stars. Great book. Really a good book to introduce us to the meat of the whole entire series. Okay, book 1 set us up for the world. Book 2 is where we actually get into it, where we get into the nuts and bolts and the gravy and the meat of the world. But look, I hope you guys enjoyed this book review of, one of the books in the World War III series, which was Operation Red Dawn and the Unthinkable. Book 2 of the World War III series by James Brazone and Miranda Watson. I currently have book 3, which is Operation Red Dawn and the Siege of Europe. I also got another book called Storm Rages by Max Alexander. I will be doing reviews of both of those books as soon as I can. But look, you guys take care of yourselves. Watch over each other. Y'all be groovy. Y'all be cool to one another. I will see you guys in the next video and in the next stream. Laters.
Thank you for watching my review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please check out my YouTube and Rumble pages for more of my content, which includes more reviews, gaming, and geek news. I will see you in the next video and the next stream. Laters.